Hi there. Last week, we talked about climate change and we discussed what climate change is. We asked you to consider how you think and feel about climate change. This week, we're going to continue that journey, but from a slightly different angle. We're going to be looking at the real world impacts of climate change, how these changes can impact you and how they can impact our fish. We already know that in order for our fish to survive, they need protection from extreme weather, they need protection from drought. Essentially, they need clean, crisp, cool water. So let's continue our journey with our fish and continue exploring climate change. Are you ready? Hey Tom, are you ready for us?
Hello, and welcome to Tank Time with Tom. Thanks for joining us. So last week we talked about where we're going to release our fish and what challenges they may face. Well, I think we're going to head over to Marquest Creek next week to release these. Seems to be a great spot. There's plenty of water, and that's where Gisell's been, so it'll look a little bit familiar for you. But speaking of fish and water, our fish are doing great. The tank is in great shape. The temperature's been nice and cool. We've got plenty of clean water. But look what I've got next to the tank. I've got another tank here. And just as a comparison, we're going to see, this is a tank with just a fraction of the water in it. And I was going to put gravel in. I've got a bag of gravel here, just like we have in this. But you know what? In conditions that are lacking, we have some situations where there's creeks filled with sediment. There's some creeks that are just scoured clean of gravel. There's no place for the eggs to get laid and no place for these fish to spawn. There's no place for the fish to hide. So let's go in and take a closer look at both of these tanks and let's ask some questions. Here we are in front of the tank that has just a fraction of the water in it. And I'll tell you, it does not look too exciting to me. So if you were a fish, would you want to live in there? And let's take a look over at our tank. And you can see 52 degrees. That looks pretty good. We've got steelhead. There's a bunch of fry, and they are just healthy and happy. So when you look at these fry, what do you notice? What do you think about and what do you observe? Well, for one, there's plenty of them in there and they're all hiding behind the rocks. So in this tank, there's a lot of cover. There's a lot of nice gravel. And as we looked in that other tank, there was hardly any water and very little structure for these fish to hide in. So if you were in either of these situations as a fish and you had a choice between living in a creek with a lot of water, cool water, a lot of places to hide versus one that didn't have much water at all and no structure, where would you want to live? And also, we talk about climate change, and the one with less water is likely the one that would be caused by climate change. And as you learned from Laura last week, climate change causes less water to enter our creeks and streams. So how might the fish's lives be different in one tank versus the other? Water temperature, less places to hide, higher concentrations of pollution, more competition for food and space. Where would you want to live? So if these tanks were a creek, which tank would you want to release your fish in and why? Well, from my standpoint, I'd certainly like to release them into the creek with more water to make sure they had plenty of space to grow and thrive. So speaking of water, let's go over to Gisell and see what she's up to. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, Tom. Every week we come out to Marquest Creek, and every time it's always different. This is normal for creeks and rivers to change throughout the seasons. But a drought is a little bit different. Climate change is causing droughts to be more frequent and severe, which could be really challenging for the fish. During a drought, it's especially important to think about how much water we use every day. How many gallons of water do you think we use? The average person in California uses between 80 to 100 gallons of water per day. That's a lot of water. That can fill up 2.5 bathtubs. Let's see how our water use affects the rivers and creeks. Where I work at Sonoma Water, we provide water to people just like you through the Russian River, which then gets collected by these collector wells, which is pulling up water from underground and sending it to your homes. Let's take a look at this model. Here we have a river with some salmon. Here we have water users, people like us. Let's see what happens to the fish when we use water for things like brushing our teeth, or washing dishes, and watering our plants, or taking a shower. Do we notice anything happening to the fish as we are using water? Oh no, there's no water left for our fish. Let's think about this. When we use water at home, it can affect how much water is in the rivers and creeks. This model showed us it's important to use less water, especially during a drought season. What can we do to use less water? We can do things like take shorter showers, turn off faucet while brushing our teeth and hands, doing full loads in the dishwasher and washing machines, and checking around our homes for water leaks. Let's take a look at the fish. They have the water they need, we have the water we need when we use less water. And it's especially important during a drought. Climate change and droughts are impacting us and the fish. So it's always important to think about using less water. Let's head over to Shelly for Ask a Biologist.
Thanks, Giselle, for showing us that model and for those great water saving tips. Hi, everyone. It's time for Ask a Biologist. Today, both of our questions are from anonymous students. We don't know who you are, but we know you're out there, and we know you're watching, and we want to answer your question. Our first question is going to be for Ryan. This anonymous student asks, how large will our trout get if it stayed in our 10-gallon tank?
Great question. Since your trout are confined to the space of a 10-gallon tank, they will be limited by the carrying capacity of their environment. The carrying capacity of the tank is determined by factors that would limit survival and growth of trout, like having enough water, maintaining good water quality, and providing enough food. Many people who keep aquariums use a guidance of 1 inch of fish per gallon of water. As trout grow, the tank will be able to support fewer fish as the carrying capacity is reduced. Ultimately, you would end up with 1 trout. So, how big would that trout get in a 10-gallon tank? Well, I asked 2 experts at our fish hatcheries. Mike Vaselli, the fish hatchery manager at the Silverado Fisheries Base, thought trout would likely grow to 4 to 5 inches in a 10-gallon tank. Tony Holland, the fish hatchery manager at Warm Springs Fish Hatchery, thought trout would grow to 1/3 of a pound, or about 10 inches in a 10-gallon tank.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks for asking for help from some experts. Our next question is for Derek, and this anonymous student asks, do trout migrate like birds?
Hi, Shelley, and thanks for this question, anonymous viewer. Animals migrate to find better locations to feed, breed, hibernate, or simply for better weather. Migratory birds and trout migrate for some of the same reasons. Trout migrate to places where food is more abundant, easier to get, or to better spawning grounds. For a trout, a large river or lake might provide a better supply of food. For steelhead, the ocean provides abundant food, and small creeks provide spawning habitat for both. In terms of navigation, flighted birds have one advantage over other migrating animals like trout. They can simply fly over or around obstacles. Trout can swim anywhere they like so long as it's in water. This limits trout to wet places like streams, rivers, and lakes. Trout can jump over small obstacles when migrating, but there is one barrier that they can't jump over: a dry stream bed. Trout need water to survive and migrate, and a dry stream is one kind of migration barrier. If the stream that leads from the spawning grounds in a small creek to the lake with the abundant food supply is blocked by a dry reach, then migration is blocked. Drought can hasten the drying of creeks, blocking trout migration. As humans, every drop of water we use comes from the environment somewhere. Make sure to conserve water and use just enough to get the job done. This helps keep more water in the creek for the trout.
That's a lot to think about, and I admit, sometimes I can feel a little overwhelmed when I think about big issues such as climate change. I'm only one person. But then I hear about people like Michael and Connor and Doug. They were out on Rindler Creek last week and they began picking up garbage. By the end of the morning, they had pretty much filled up a pickup truck with the garbage. But you know what? They made a difference. So for each of the three of you, Connor, Michael, and Doug, a rock in the jar, because individual actions really do help. Now also this week, I received an email from Meadowview Elementary School, Miss Bethel's class, and they sent not only a whole list of questions for our biologists, but they wrote a list of things they're going to do together to help protect our fish. They're going to pick up litter when they see it. Clearly they're not going to litter. They're going to keep their hands out of the fish tank, and they're going to work together to keep our oceans clean. So for every student in that class, we're going to put a rock in the jar. Now, this is getting heavy. It's almost full, folks, and we've got one more week, one final episode, and we hope that between now and then you're going to send us your ideas so we can get this jar all the way to the top. Now, next week, we're going to release our fish, and we really hope you're going to join us. Tom is going to put the fish into his car, and he's going to drive up and meet Carl and Gisell out on the Russian River where they're going to let their fish go. Between now and then, be thinking about how you can work to help protect our trout.